Hey everybody, how are you today? So this is going to be your homework. You're going to be watching us lecture and then completing the exit slips so you can show me what you learned, as well as doing those different personality tests and reflecting on kind of, your what you kind of found out during those personality tests. And remember, the goal here is to really think that when it comes to your personality of who you are is a mixture of our culture, of nature and nurture. So remember, when we're talking about nature, we're talking about, the characteristics, the traits that you inherited from mom and dad in terms of heredity. So the idea that you have a certain aptitude or set of skills for something. And sociobiologists are kind of, backing this idea that who you are comes from your DNA, because they say, look at a baby. It's already born with an instinct, with drives, with reflexes, and because of twin studies which show the similarities between the groups. Now, other people out there, of course, support nurture, and they say that who you are, it's totally based off the environment that you were raised in. And they say that if a child has been physically abused, it's going to have devastating effects on them for life, as we've seen with Anna and Isabel and Jeannie, and even on animals, we see the effects, the Harlow studies. Now, continuing to talk about nurture, we're going to talk here a little bit about psychology, and we're going to talk about Ivan Pavlov. Now, Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s, he was a Russian scientist, and he was actually trying to learn about a dog's digestive process, and he was trying to figure out how much a dog salivates by collecting their salivation. And of course, dogs are more likely to salivate and to get excited and to slobber, basically, if they see meat, if they see steak, if they see some kind of delicious looking food item placed in front of them. And he was trying to basically collect that. And basically, what started to happen was that as his assistant was bringing food to the dog, just the sound of the footsteps when the door opened and just the sound, the dog started to salivate even then. And Pavlov and his assistant were like, wow, that's weird. We haven't even brought the food yet, and the dogs have started to salivate. It's like they know we're coming, and obviously they could hear them coming, but it's like the dogs learned that as soon as that man walked in, and with those certain heavy footsteps, food would be coming, and they got excited, and they started to salivate. And as he started to think about what was happening here, he realized the dogs are learning. They're learning, and they're adapting, and they're really kind of being impacted by their environment. And honestly, you're constantly being impacted by your environment. And the environment that you are placed in, or basically nurture, is really having an impact on your development. And so what we're going to talk here just a little bit is about Pavlov's experiment, where he really realized that people are constantly learning or being conditioned to their environment. If you ever take psychology courses and they talk about behavioral psychology or classical conditioning, this is what we're going to talk about. So what Pavlov says is, he says, look, at first, if you ring a bell, a dog will have no response whatsoever. This is what we refer to as a neutral stimulus. So the dog didn't have like a certain reaction to the bell. It wasn't too loud, it wasn't too scary, it didn't hurt their ears, okay? Now, if you take an object like a steak, okay, and we'll call that the unconditioned stimulus, meaning the dog does not have to learn a response to it. If the dog sees the steak, the dog can smell the steak, the dog will naturally start to salivate, okay? And so what basically had been happening was that every time, the man had been opening up the door and basically a bell had been sounding and he heard the footsteps, he knew that the steak was about to be coming and he was getting excited, and so he started to salivate. And so this is what we call basically the natural response. So this unconditioned stimulus, this natural object or stimulus, which is the steak, led to this natural or unconditioned response. Nobody had to teach this dog to salivate. He just naturally was excited and started to slobber as soon as he smelled a steak and saw the steak. So you place the object, and this is the natural unconditioned response. But the dog is learning here during conditioning, during this behavioral approach as he's placed in this environment. And he's learning that every time that door opens and he hears the sound of this bell and this man's footsteps and he hears walking, that the food's coming. And so he starts to get excited. And so before you know it, just the sound of the door opening or of a bell would make it possible for the dog to get excited and start to salivate. And so basically now you have a dog that salivates, that gets excited, that starts to slobber every time he just hears a bell. And so the dog has learned. He has been classically conditioned. His behavior has been changed. And so the environment that you put someone in really and truly does impact them. And so obviously, if they're in an environment that focuses on love and nurture, it's going to positively impact them. But if they're in an environment where there is no kind of stimulation or physical or mental abuse, it's going to negatively impact them and leave lasting scars on them, because they are learning, as Jeannie was learning, that every time that she spoke out, she would be physically hit. So she simply learned not to talk, not to respond, and basically taught herself that. Now you might say, is this easy to do? The answer is yes. It is pretty easy to classically condition someone or something. In fact, you have been conditioned. You've been conditioned all your life, now to the point that when a bell goes off in school, you immediately stand up. You know it's time to go. And you basically are responding to bells. It's not like, the teacher can tell you, wait till you're dismissed, but most kids really struggle with that. It's more so that they hear a bell, they get up, and then they go. Okay, they've been conditioned to respond that way. You've been conditioned to respond to your alarm clock. Your body might even wake up, probably not because you're a teen and you're tired, but as you get older, you may wake up on the weekends because you're just used to getting up without even an alarm clock. So you can basically teach yourself to respond to anything. For example, if you've ever gotten sick on a certain food, your body has had a learned response. For once, I remember my husband and I were first dating, I had mushrooms, and it was like we went out to dinner and we got like stuffed mushrooms. I threw up like a ton that night, and okay, I was really kind of leery about having mushrooms again. Then, a few months later, we went out to eat and I got some pasta, and in the pasta sauce there were mushrooms, and they were small and chopped up, and I didn't really think much of it. It's just a little bit in the sauce. It's not like it's a huge appetizer. It should be fine. I threw up again. And so yet again, now, whether I truly have an allergy to mushrooms or not, I had created this learned response in my mind where I was like, nope, not eating mushrooms. That will make me vomit. You can also have positive responses with certain smells, where if, for example, you always had a grandma who wore a certain perfume, it's just smelling that perfume now could remind you of her. So when we're talking about this conditioning or this learning, it can be related to having an object or a smell or a sound, and you're pairing these things together time and time again until it's left an imprint on you, and it's really changed your behavior and your thoughts and your feelings. And just to kind of depress you a little bit more, I don't really mean to, but honestly, there is some depressing topics in this chapter as we talk about Annabelle and Isabel and Jeannie, and now we're going to talk about this cute little baby named Albert. And Albert was an orphan. And unfortunately, what you're starting to realize, I'm hoping, is that, until recent years, the state got away with so much when it came with orphans because they lived in an orphanage. They were considered wards of the state where their food and shelter was dependent on the government. And so, they were split at birth and they were put into twin studies. And in this case, John Watson, who is the psychologist, he is going to do this famous study. And the whole idea basically was, could you teach a child to be afraid? And that's basically what we're getting at. So basically, can you classically condition a baby? Obviously, you can classically condition a dog. So the thought was, well, if we can teach a dog to something, we clearly can teach a baby to do something. And they kind of just were wondering, when does classic conditioning begin? Does it begin at a certain age? And clearly, no. You can teach a baby from a very young age to behave, to respond to certain stimulus, whether it's a sound, whether it's an object, whether it's a smell. And what he is going to basically do here is he's going to take this baby, and in the beginning, he has the baby play with cute little bunnies, and it's very clear the baby's not afraid of the cute little bunnies. The baby's snuggling the bunny, touching the bunny, hugging the bunny. No response, no fear. So that's your neutral stimulus. And then, in a totally separate day, the psychologist basically scares the crap out of the baby by drumming that hammer, making all sorts of loud noises with a crowbar, almost like lightning sounds, to see how the baby responds. And naturally, the baby is terrified and the baby cries. So that basically is your unconditioned response. You don't have to teach the baby to be afraid of those scary noises. And so now, as you can imagine, what he's going to do is he's going to pair the two together. He's going to try to classically condition the behavior of the baby, to change it, to make it learn that every time it sees a bunny, or anything white and furry for that matter, that it should be scared. Did you check out my meme there? Yeah, that's actually a pretty good meme. Did you see this one? Just to show you guys, I'll go down a little bit. Oh no, I won't let me move this. I want to move this screen. There we go. No, I went the wrong way. Yeah, I don't always scare babies, but when I do, it's for psychology. Sorry, I thought that was pretty good. So literally, this neutral stimulus, as I've been saying, is this, this white rat, this bunny. He uses several different furry objects. He used a rat, he used a bunny, but the baby wasn't afraid of anything white or furry. But the baby was naturally kind of, scared of loud noises, crowbar, hammer, lightning sounds, you name it. So that was basically the unconditioned response to this unconditioned stimulus. And basically here with this classical conditioning, the idea is, can you teach the baby? Can you make the baby afraid of something white and furry if you pair it with scary noises every single time? So can you teach that baby fear? Can you really see the impact of environment on someone? And yet again, this is all for funsies. Isn't that terrible just to see, like, how does environment impact a child? And as you can imagine, that poor baby is going to get terrified. And it's because of something called stimulus generalization, where basically what we're going to see happen is that, you can see it, even though if he uses, I can't even remember, honestly, guys, right now, I'm so tired today, if he does the experiment initially with the rabbit or with the mouse, the rat. But in time, what we see is stimulus generalization, where it's not just that particular animal, it's anything white and furry. And same thing when it came to Pavlov and his dog. Even though it was only one particular bell, any kind of bell-like noise or alarm, the dog basically would start to salivate to. So what you basically see is that the more times that classical conditioning occurs, okay, you can basically have that response basically reproduced in a great kind of reaction. And you're more likely, so the more the conditioning kind of occurs, the more likely that your response is going to continue, and it's going to kind of increase its likelihood to similar kinds of, things. So it might not just be a rabbit, it could be a mouse, it could be, anything that's white and furry as far as an object, or any kind of similar sound. So the greater that similarity between those two stimuli, the greater the likelihood that stimulus generalization will occur. And so poor baby Albert, he becomes afraid of all small furry animals. And just to kind of show you clearly that it's about something white and small and furry, when they put in a big dog in the room that has black fur, that doesn't scare him at all. And it seemed kind of like a scary dog. I mean, it didn't like growl at him, it didn't like go for Albert, but many children would have been afraid of the dog because it was big and because they already had been in a fearful and anxious state. No, big, scary, black fur dog, nothing, no reaction. But Albert got so bad with this stimulus generalization that he actually was afraid. They brought in Dr. Watson with a Santa beard, and he like flipped out and started to cry from that. So anything white, anything furry, the kid freaked out. It was absolutely awful. Now here's the thing. You might be wondering, well, what happens? Did that dog salivate for the rest of his life? Did Albert freak out every time, he saw, something white and furry? What happens? Well, technically extinction can occur, where basically if you stop pairing the items together, the response will stop. So for example, if, the dog continues to hear a bell, but he never ever gets food again, eventually he will learn, okay, it's just a bell, I'm not getting food. Now, you can have spontaneous recovery where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the dog all of a sudden starts to salivate because maybe something was triggered in their mind that we don't realize, but for the most part, it will go away. And potentially that could have happened with Albert as well, that basically over time, if he saw things that were white and furry and they didn't press any noises, his fear would have abated and he would have been perfectly fine. Now, it is possible though, like I said though, for, even though this, extinction period to occur, for there could be this spontaneous recovery where for no reason whatsoever, the reaction can come back. And if you noticed, I said I was kind of hesitant about Albert because poor baby Albert dies from disease at age 6, most likely because of his difficult upbringing, malnourishment, treatment in the orphanage, just a whole variety of factors. But really, it was just disease overall that took his life. And from the time period that he was living in, I don't remember off the top of my head the disease. You guys can Google it and let me know. It's a pretty famous experiment. You can actually see video footage of it. But yeah, he kind of go through periods of time where he did have spontaneous recovery, and they thought they had cured him of this fear, and then it would come back. And the same might be, for you guys. I remember like there was this fast food place called Checkers. For years, I couldn't eat that food because, I thought I was going to vomit. Eventually, I tried like some fries and I didn't vomit, and I tried them like several times over again because the fast food place was close to my parents' house, and I don't know, they got food from there a lot. So I sucked it up and I ate a couple of fries, and eventually I did have this extinction. But I don't know, then there was a period, I remember one day where I did kind of have this spontaneous recovery, and I thought I was going to just lose it just from like smelling the grease in the food. So, it definitely can happen. And as you get older, you'll see these pairing together definitely occurring more and more in your life. And the reason we talk about this, guys, is just so you can understand the role that, nurture has kind of on your development and who you are and on your personality. And also, so you can just kind of understand that in the fields of psychology and sociology, there's been some pretty unethical, awful experiments which have happened over time that the ASA has put a stop to nowadays, the American Sociological Association. Last part of my lecture, which I need to talk about today to wrap up Chapter 4, Section 1, is for you to understand that overall, today, sociologists finally believe that it's not nature, it's not nurture, it's a combination of nature and nurture together which impact your personality and who you are. In fact, they identify 4 factors which influence your personality and your socialization process. The first one is heredity, and I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it. When you're taking these notes, they're obviously yours, so feel free to write as much as you want, but we're talking about the physical traits, that you inherit from your parents. It also includes the aptitude, so are you great at playing piano? Are you excellent at crossword puzzles? Can you play basketball like a pro? Are you fantastic at golf or tennis? Whatever it is that you might be, you're a football all-star. It's all about the fact that in your DNA, you got, something from them, certain aptitudes, certain interests, certain physical characteristics, and so this would be all kind of evidenced by those twin studies. Now, obviously, there are sociologists who believe that aptitudes can still be, learned. We see that kids who've been adopted often act like their adopted parents, have the same interests, are good at the same things. And they're like, well, how is this possible? Because yet again, through tutors, through practice, you can get good at anything. And parents obviously can encourage or discourage certain aptitudes. Another factor which they say influences personality and social behavior is birth order. I'm not going to talk too much about this one right now because we're going to handle this next week, Monday and Tuesday, and we're going to read some articles that talk about this more so. But honestly, they really say that if you are the firstborn, your parents are probably the strictest in terms of discipline, that you have the most responsibility on your shoulders, and you might be considered more of the leader compared to the middle child, which is often overlooked, more rebellious, more outspoken, compared to the lastborn, the baby of the family, who usually gets away with murder. And basically what's going on here is that your parents are treating you differently because their parenting has changed now that they have more children. And they know perhaps that kids are not so breakable, that they're going to be okay. They've done it all before. They've learned from their mistakes. They realize, where they can be more lax, more, and where they shouldn't be. And they also put a lot of pressure on the older kids to take care of the younger kids. And so, in turn, how your parents treat you shapes your personality. It's a two-way street there. And the next one is just parental characteristics in general. So are your parents older? Are they from a totally different generation? Are they tech savvy? Are they not? How much freedom do they give you? We're going to talk about parenting styles next week and journal about that, as well as the birth order. How educated are they? Do they value education? What kind of jobs do they have? How much money do they have? Do they make you go to church? Is religion something you value? What's their social economic status? Are they part of a subculture? Do they follow the society's norms? Are you in a cult? If you're in a cult, you should get out now. No, seriously. Um, so this all is going to impact who you are, and also gender and, the gender roles that they play. Do they follow gender stereotypes? Do they embrace those? So all of this is going to be, it could be your ethnic background, are you new to a country? All of these factors are going to be impacting your personality because it's things that your parents find important. And last but not least, it's just kind of the cultural environment in general. So, Americans obviously in terms of values, they value freedom and competitiveness and individualism, and we said practicality and efficiency and democracy. But other, cultures are not like that. They don't focus on like economic success. They focus on happiness, whatever that is. And so they're not focused on perhaps competing so much or getting the best grades. They're focused on just being happy or being free or being relaxed. They're not focused perhaps on always getting that gold star and getting that all done. So just being an American really impacts us compared to, if we grew up in Finland or Sweden or, Russia. As you've learned in your different culture products, they have their own way of doing things. I give you an example here at the bottom about the Ik tribe of Uganda. And this tribe is like really interesting because before World War II, they were actually pretty prosperous. And then after World War II, the government came in and took away some of their best land. And then ultimately, they ended up living kind of in this barren area where it was difficult to be hunters, gatherers, or even turn to farming. And they basically abandoned their children. Yeah, seriously. And once their kids turned 3, they like kick their kids out of their house and basically are just like, yep, figure it out on your own. And so these kids basically like create these like packs where they like run wild, so to speak, and kind of, gosh, what's that book? Well, they're on the island and it's just them. What is that? Lord of the Flies. And they're basically just they create their own little leader, their own kind of rule system, their own kind of punishments. If they don't do chores, they help each other, like, cook, clean, eat, survive, hygiene. And they're kind of just off on their own. And, when we're talking about cultural universals, everybody has a kid, everybody raises their kid. The cultural particular is how they raise their kid. Well, their cultural particular is very different than ours. And obviously, it's going to sound very ethnocentric because I'm judging them off of our standards, but I think it sounds crazy. Just totally like off the wall nuts. But, in terms of a cultural relativism standpoint where I'm trying to judge them, I've never walked in their shoes. I've never been starving. And so, it's very difficult for me to obviously judge them. But the environment that you're raised in, whether it's war-torn, whether it's drugs, and the values of that country and what's happening in that society are definitely going to impact who you are. All right, guys, that wraps it up for now. So hopefully you watch this. You're going to do the exit slip. You're going to do those other personality tests and write that reflection. See you next time, guys. Have a great day.